Hello everybody, this is Plywood coming at you with another speedrun of Pampas and Selene, the Maze of Demons, completed in 1 hour, 1 minute, and 55 seconds. This is about a 7.5 minute improvement over my previous world record. So a few things have changed since the previous run, namely that we are now on a later patch than that run, and there's been a few changes to help the speedrun, specifically an issue with the soul gem ability. So in this game there's an item called the soul gem, and the soul gem allows you to harness the power of enemies. And the way the soul gem works is that you have to kill enough enemies to gain their power. And there's a running counter invisible in the background for each enemy type. Now, in the old patch, if you ever had to load your save, for instance, you died on a boss fight or something, all the tracking for the various enemies would reset to 0. This is a real pain because if you ever made a mistake during your run, your kill routing would be completely broken. And you couldn't really practice the game effectively because when you loaded a save, the kill tracking would be 0. So any kills that you would get right at the start of the game, for instance, would not matter at the end. This is a little bit different with the snakes. Rather than doing a damage boost, I actually opt to take out the snake, which loses about half a second or so. However, I feel that the damage reduction is worth it. So that is a big change with the soul gem. However, that's not the only thing that has been adjusted with the game. There's a few maps that are slightly different. Most of it is not relevant for the speedrun, thankfully, but a couple of times it is. I'll try to note them as we move along here. So previously, my intro routing was a bit different in terms of how I approach doing the various starting quests, because we have a lot of things we have to do at the start. But I want to give credit to Endless Soul. They did a MSX run, the MSX version, and their routing helped me realize, hey, I could be doing my intro routing a bit more efficiently, along with efficiency for the end of the game. So I just want to provide credit for that. Now that we have the fire practice quest, we're going to take out some slimes. And finally buy our soul gem. I try to hold off on buying here. That way I can try to avoid shopping as much as possible. And we buy a bundle of arrows for later. It does suck, though, that I accidentally burned myself. You have to be very careful that you don't burn yourself from the splash damage of the fireball. And since I don't have the bucket yet, couldn't put the fire out. The other thing that is very relevant with this new routing is we are no longer picking up the piggy bank. The piggy bank is an item that reduces shop costs for your arrows, mana, and any special items that you can buy. Thankfully, the piggy bank is not necessary in terms of our shopping, our economy. However, we have to be very mindful of our shop purchases at the start of the game because the money can get a bit tight. This is the other reason why it's good to be a bit more efficient with your shopping. Plan out your purchases and try to reduce damage to some extent, just so that you don't end up having a money problem when you need the money. The big sticking points for the money are the shoes, the boots, and the grip gloves. All you need is 2 Scorpion Soul Gem attacks for the top guard, and we'll hold this third one for later to make killing the worms a bit faster. It's worth mentioning that now that the Soul Gem kill tracking fix has been enabled, the routing possibilities and chances for variation have improved drastically. So we go through the warp hole there. Now you can return to the start of the castle with the halo instead. However, that is slightly slower than using the warp from going from Uranus to the bat room. So unless you need to shop, it's best to do it that way. The other massive change that occurred in the newer patches, starting in 105, is a mechanic called coyote frames. I didn't know about this concept until it was brought up recently, and this change occurred. So if you've ever watched Looney Tunes, you will know that Wile E. Coyote will run on thin air and then realize he's on thin air and then fall into a canyon or a pit or whatever. And what coyote frames are basically a little bit of a gimme when you go off of a platform. So when you walk off of a platform, there's a narrow window of time where you can still jump, even though technically you're not on a platform anymore. This had really massive ramifications for the speedrun. Before, this game felt more stiff and demanding in terms of the jumping. If you were off a platform, you were off the platform and you were falling. Now you have much more clearance to make jumps, and it's more forgiving. But the other thing that this does is it opens up jumps that were not possible before. Because you are going further along your x-axis, there are jumps that before were either very difficult to do, they were basically pixel perfect, and you had to perfectly press a direction and jump at the same time. Now, those jumps are much easier, and jumps that would require that extra distance in the first place are now possible. These flames, you can start running through them right when the flame dies out, which is a very important little tip. Now you could go to the alcove and wait. I think doing it this way may be a little bit more efficient. Then you do all the movement together. This chest is pivotal, we cannot miss it. All the secret chests that we pick up in the back castle are totally essential. So there's definitely an argument to be made of having worms in this screen, because the jellyfish can just be really trolly. And then you could use worms to clear the screen, so to speak. But that's not necessarily going to work. It's just a way to make it a little bit more consistent. So as you can see, this room has changed a little bit. Now there is a dash point that you can use with blink, but it makes no difference in the run as far as what we do in this room. And if you time your jump just right, you can levy boost and save 0.08 here while still getting the ghosts. It's 0.08. I don't go for it just because you need to get a perfect levy boost to get that benefit. And we need both of those ghosts because we did not take out the ghosts at the piggy bank spot. Just ran forward. Not picking up piggy bank saves about 20 seconds, maybe a bit less. And I specifically went up to 80 arrows on that shopping trip. So for the screen coming up, you need to delay it just a little bit, so you could either do a dummy jump or like just flicker your movement, because if you move too fast, the axe guard will attack you. Just something I wanted to figure out, because sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't, and you just need a little bit of a delay to get into the position to jump over the axe guard. Here's another place where you don't need to fight, so we just jump over the first bee. And unlike before, we don't go back and forth in that alien screen with the gate. It also seems to be that you don't want to pick up the piggy bank early on 100%. It seems that doing the piggy bank later ends up being a bit faster. Bit of a safe approach for the werewolf, making sure you don't get stunned, because it's a big time loss if you do, and you could potentially die if your health is low. So we get up to all the slimes and then turn it in. From time to time in this run, you will see that I slow down or delay for apparently no reason. The reason why that happens is because as of the recording of this commentary track and of this run, the auto splitter still has some issues with it where it will advance when it shouldn't, double split, things like that. And I have to account for that just so I can make sure that my splits are going at the appropriate pace. And I am very much reliant on my splits for this run. Now, if you practice enough and really get amazing at this game, you know, beyond good and all that, you don't need the auto splitter to keep track of what you're doing. However, I really appreciate it because I always have a reference for what I'm doing. So even though I would like to say, hey, you know, maybe the auto splitter's not working, but I don't need it, that's just not the case. And you really don't have time to split in this game. Pretty much the only times you could split are when you're on floating platforms or right after you defeat a boss. Otherwise, you really don't have time to split for the most part. There's not a lot of waiting around in this game, which is good from a, you know, speedrun perspective of, hey, there's always something happening, there's always something to watch. But from a practical standpoint, it's a bit of a chore to manually split and try to keep track of your time. Definitely some movement errors in the Cyclops realm, but nothing too horrible. I don't really pay much attention to this dungeon. It's not terribly important. And the first boss goes down lickety-split with the addition of the tome. It actually used to be that Cyclops would float below near the ground, and now Cyclops starts above. And I think generally speaking that is to our benefit in terms of avoiding attacks. So we get our Charon coin, Charon, and we go turn in our Essence quest, accidentally swapping to Pampas. Even though I've cut 7.5 minutes from the run, there are still silly errors that are not just, you know, bad luck or whatever in this run. So there's a bit of a question here whether this is something you should even do, of getting Twin Bone here or getting it later on. I'm not too sure if it's worthwhile. You could also get Twin Bone before getting the castle key, but you have to go out of your way to do that. So that's where the money really matters, is picking up the grip gloves there. And I'm still fairly flush with cash. You have to give yourself something of a buffer because you don't know what sorts of drops you're going to get while taking out enemies. That's the incidental drops. So again, it's questionable whether you really want to get Spike Ball here. I just do because it's there. One nice little change, these ceiling oozes, slimes, whatever you want to call them, the goo, takes less to get the power-up, which we need absolutely. So that is a little bit faster now. So we are now going to do our main tower errands. I always take this right path rather than going up the shaft. So this room with the bats, it's slightly faster to just stay floating. However, for consistency purposes, using the platforms is probably better, because the bats can fly in your way and damage you. Ideally there you do a full jump into the save, and as you're falling you throw a fireball, or I suppose on the way up, just to take out the first spike ball. This chest is completely necessary, because we need to buy Polymorph next. Now, you could make some kind of argument that, hey, maybe you should just not bother getting the Polymorph. But I think it's still probably for the best that we do it now rather than making the special trip at the end of the game. But maybe Polymorph is more of a crutch. We do use it from time to time, so it does save a bit of time. Because the only alternative would be... The other alternative would be going up the left side rather than the right side, and not going this way. And I don't know, that might be a bit faster. It's hard to say. You definitely need Polymorph for Lich, so that is non-negotiable. But it's possible that this trip right here to pick up Polymorph is not really necessary, even though we use Polymorph. So this was a big mistake. This mushroom is newer. This actually slows down this room a bit. You want to wait at the bullets and charge your polymorph there. So like there we use polymorph, but it's not necessary for those enemies whatsoever. The difference would be if we were to skip polymorph, we would definitely take up the left path. I would think we would take the left path and then get the warp wall spot, destroy the rubble by the final boss, and then just get polymorph at the end of the game. But you have to add up all the instances we use polymorph, which sometimes it's completely contextual whether we're using polymorph or not, which adds to some of the complication. I did do math on the grip gloves to see if grip gloves are worth it, and as far as I can tell, they are worth it. Not by a whole lot, but it appears to be worthwhile picking up the grip gloves, which was my hunch. The grip gloves, if you don't know, both speed up our climbing speed and prevent us from falling off of ladders when we take damage. So that fifth screen we just went through is a great example of the grip gloves being useful and would change our strategy on that screen. So while you don't need the grip gloves, the fact that you gain the increased speed is huge. This dungeon is also a great example of why polymorph is so helpful, because we can immediately take out those gestures without having to wait for them to get into particular positions. You know, these gesture movements are random. I don't know if there's any way to determine them. I don't know if that's a thing, but as far as I can tell, there's just various patterns the gestures can do. So that would be a screen where if we didn't have polymorph, it would probably end up being slower most of the time. What I do know for certain is that if you are picking up polymorph, you definitely want to take the right path. But it's possible that not picking up polymorph is like the next frontier of saving time on any percent. So this strategy is a bit outdated now. There's actually a pretty good way that doesn't take as much damage, that is practically the same speed. And you can do it all with Pampas and keep your health loss quite low, which would be beneficial because, as you just saw there, we had to go do a shopping trip. So if you can prevent a shopping trip, that would be beneficial. That saves more time than, you know, even if it's maybe a second slower of a 2-cycle fight. Compared to doing an extra shopping trip, it's worth it. That is the other, there are many frontiers. That is the other next frontier of any percent routing, is trying to keep our shopping trips to a minimum, which will be, I think, a key part of getting a sub-hour run. It is my opinion, based off of the mistakes in this run and the potential for better strategies, which, you know, this game is only like a month and a half old or something, that we can see sub-hour at some point. It'll be tough, but I think it's doable. So what you're going to see me do here is experiment. I'm going to actually take out these worms. This is a very convenient spot to farm worms. And use worms in the, not the next dungeon, but the dungeon after that to do some skips. From what I can tell though, it ends up being a bit slower doing this, sadly, due to the having to farm worms. This screen has changed. It's less of a pop in, pop out to try to get good luck, and instead a RNG setup to basically have good positions on the Magi, the Wizrobes, whatever. Good use of the umbrella and coyote jumping here to get over to the save point. That jump before was extremely hard to do, practically not worth going for because you'd probably fall most of the time, and now we have a very convenient way to reset the situation. Thankfully we don't need to go back and get any items because I already did my shopping trip. The important thing is watch when the tail is at its peak, and then as it's going down from that peak, then you jump. You can just jump straight up. You don't need to jump in an arc if you time it right. Very important that you do not get poisoned there. Always worth mentioning. It's like 31 ticks of poison. It's very bad. Now we go to Moax, and we're gonna go take out the boars. You will see in the 100% speedrun, which I am routing and planning right now, that we do not do this movement for the boar poison. Or boar blood, excuse me. We get the boar blood along the way as we get the antidote from Asclepius. Because the whole two birds with one stone thing. As much as possible in this run, I try to package trips together when I can. Because while you can maybe individually do something faster by doing it later, if you just like look at one thing in isolation, sure, you can get X item more quickly if you have, you know, double jump or blank. But the problem is packaging. You are spending time, opportunity costs, right, of getting a thing later rather than when you can do it all together when you are already there. And sometimes this doesn't work the way you think, and it's better to do it later even though you're in the area. But that is for another time in 100%, which is looking to be a pretty cool run. So coming up is a fail. You want to use this boar power-up in a different way to make this consistent on 60 FPS. This is another big change from the previous run that I posted on YouTube. I was running unlocked frame rate before, and I have found at least one instance where unlocked frame rate ends up changing gameplay compared to a locked 60. It also appears that 60 FPS genuinely slows you down, which is not that surprising. Over time, it appears that you walk faster with unlocked frame rate. Because of this, and the concerns of fairness between people's hardware, I made the decision to have it be a requirement on the speedrun.com leaderboard to have FPS be locked to 60 and for it to be visible on screen. which is why you see it in the top left corner. I also do want to make a quick apology that the controller display is not appearing on this recording. I try to have that up just for education purposes. Sadly, I neglected to do that in this run. If it was there, it would be right where the boss HP is. This boss is a bit random, a bit of a chore, because the boulders come out randomly. When we get to triple speed, that's when we want to throw out our soul gem ability, and ideally you would have 2 board attacks, not 1. Just to get a little bit more damage out. The boar really isn't a great power there, but it's convenient. And we try to go for convenience because convenience is faster, unless you can prove that going out of your way to get something more powerful is faster. So Nephili is quite different in this route. For one, I'm using both arrows and sword to damage the golems to make it a bit faster than slashing the whole way. The other thing you're going to see me do is I'm going to use worms to do some skips. Now, like I was mentioning before, it appears based off of the math that this ends up losing you time compared to just saving worms for Pyros at the end of the game. A little bit of an oopsie on the water there. Thankfully not that big of a deal. This is when I realized, oh wait, I should go get worms because I want to test this out. Not the most efficient way of doing this, if you were to do it. And then we take out the worms, not just for the purposes of XP, but so we have some worm kills for worms later on. So you need 7 worms for that. Now this is a strat that I think I'm going to implement even if I'm not using worms, which is take out that golem and then jump over the pit. So I think that ends up being faster than riding the floating platform across the water. So at the very least, we did find some interesting routing from trying this out with the worms. There's another place where we're using sheep. It's not necessary, but it's helpful for the spike balls because they're just floating. And you just hit them once. But who knows? This is a bit more efficient than how I was doing the mines before. However, it's still a bit awkward to get this quite right. There is a way to manipulate how the golems move depending on your position relative to them. And it's the thing you have to be mindful of. As you can see, we have very few arrows. It is so important that you enter that dungeon with 100 arrows, basically. Minimum 90. So this strategy is a little bit outdated. I would do it a little bit differently now. Like, you don't actually need that ceiling. It's easier that way to throw the fireballs. However, you really can just do a tiny jump and avoid doing the X-axis lateral movement on the bottom platform. There is an alternative strategy that Zeroth Cat, who is working on a co-op run with Grandius, came up, where you fall off the middle platform and throw a fireball as you fall down, which is even more efficient. But that is very tricky. I do imagine that it is faster because you don't have to do that extra jump. But the problem is you heavily risk yourself accidentally mistiming your fireball and blowing yourself up, which is not good. I actually did not need any bucket refill there, but it's very hard to keep track of that, of course. I wish I could remember that, but it's difficult to keep track of everything in this run. Like I said, this game is very high tempo. I've used that phrase a lot when describing this run. And when you get to Arachne, specifically, when you get to that point in the run, you've done your chores to start really buzzing through these dungeons. You know, we get through 10 dungeons, excuse me, like 9 dungeons in 40 minutes-ish, a little less. So that's a lot of dungeoneering really quickly, and there's not a lot of breaks. In fact, there were things that are in the casual mode that were completely taken out to make this game even faster, which is cool. Like, it makes everything faster. But the double-edged sword nature of that is you have less time for breaks. Really beautiful drop fireball there. That is tough. You really have to be on point with your timing there. It's not a big time save, but it is very cool to see. Very flashy. This screen you definitely could, if the luck is on your side, you could just go for it on the first go, but I am not willing to do that yet, and I don't think it's really necessary, because if you go for it and it fails, you're losing a lot of time. It's a lot of platforming. So here, this is the power of coyote jumping, coyote frames. We can make that jump from that platform over to the left side. You're really supposed to use the snakes to create a pathway, but thankfully that is not necessary, and that chest is faster than the chest in Cyclops. I believe so. The chests did change a bit for the secret chest, but I believe it's faster than Cyclops. I haven't retimed it, but I believe it is. Cyclops, you have to fall down and then climb back up. So this was actually a really nice Python fight, which is something that you can't always say. Python thankfully went to the bottom floor, and that helps a lot. These days, I am not planting mines on the top platform, then activating the boss. I'm just rolling the dice. Again, I really do not know what's the best approach for this boss. It's very difficult to ascertain due to the RNG factor of this boss. Is it better to set up more beforehand? Is it better to go get something different than bombs? I don't think it is. I think bombs are fine. They do decent damage, and it's convenient. Hilarious burn, and bad ladder climbing. The little mistakes are becoming more obvious now that we are at this pace. But the thing about speedrunning is, for most people, they're just dazzled by like what you're doing. So here we're using the arrow to get the bat swarm and then doing a damage boost down the levitator. Really cool strategy. because we're going to use the bats coming up ahead. So like a lot just happened there, and that's really neat. But if you listen to speedrunners while they're doing attempts, it's like, oh my god, I messed up movement for half a second. Woe is me. Meanwhile, this game is almost sub-hour. So if you're wondering why did he never get the bat ability, I deliberately was avoiding using getting the bat ability up until this point because I want to use it for a skip. In the previous run, I believe I used these single eye golems. They look like the boss from Mega Man 2 or whatever, to do this rune skip. But in this run, I'm actually using that to save some time in the Gorgon dungeon. So we have to have an alternative. And since we have to do that movement to get the scepter, the bats are right there, and it's very convenient just to do a single arrow to take out a bat. Obviously, there's other places you can get the bat power very easily, but it seems to be the most efficient way to do it. Now that we have double jump, things start getting quite interesting. The double jump is a lot of fun. Nice little air jump there to get off the ladder. This screen is very tight. This is one of those places where I think grip gloves make a difference because we can get up onto this position with the golem fast enough that it's not on the opposite side. We get our last essence. Sadly, I got knocked down. That's okay. What happens when we get knocked down? We get back up again. So there's the skip with the bats. That can be done with a variety of powers, but bats are just convenient. And you have certainly killed enough bats at this point to have that power. And then we use the bats here just to clear our way to this gravestone. These mini Dracos can be super annoying. Be careful trying to hit that fireball on the opposite way. You have to take out all those enemies to clear the ladder for the boss. And very, very important that you do not neglect getting the essence turn-in, because that increases your damage output with Selene. And Selene is pivotal for this boss fight. So there's a particular timing you have to do to move past Dracos. The thing you want to avoid is going onto the other side too quickly, that Dracos then turns and hits you. So in other words, you want Dracos to burn in the opposite direction of where you're going, not in the direction you're moving, because if that happens, you're probably getting hit. It's very important to keep this power here as well, because if you don't, then you will, unless you walk through the broom, you'll get the broom power up, and we are deliberately trying to hold that for the final boss. There is a secret chest you can get here, but it's a bit out of the way, and we're going to get one anyways in the realm itself. Coyote jumping helps with this screen coming up. It's still this is still a risky move of double jumping over the pit. Definitely don't want to forget turning in that essence. You want to do it before you do the Gorgon movement. So that was a bit inefficient, but we at least remembered. I hope you all like hearing the negative sound. Definitely sounds like a negative sound in this game. Love this strat. The double jump burn strategy. So secret chests have become chests. They're no longer gravestones, which means we no longer can portal here. Can no longer portal to the gravestone. We have to use the save point, which reinforces how important it is that we do not hit a save point while we're doing this little diversion. I mean, I call it a diversion. You have to do this to beat the game. It's just that doing it now means we get the benefits of Zeus's Wrath, which are fairly minor. They're not that big of a deal. Somehow I did not finish this, didn't initiate the Zeus quest entirely here, so I had to re-enter. I was like, that didn't seem right. And I confirmed, so good on me. Just waiting on these skeletons to finally bother standing up and get burned. It's honestly really nice that there are skeletons there that you have to destroy, because it very conveniently allows us to farm some skeletons for their soul gem ability before Kraken. So we have Zeus's Wrath. That will figure in a little bit, not significantly, but it's something. That is the usage of that soul gem ability to skip that whole sequence to access that gravestone. Saves like 10 seconds or something, 13 seconds. That soul gem ability does a ton of damage to Dracos, but you don't need it. So I forgot, you want to charge a polymorph in the floating platforms by Ares, since there's nothing better for you to do, so you can use it for that room. If your movement is completely crisp, you can fall off of this bottom ladder and blink. It's a very tight timing and it looks super cool, but the window for it is quite tight. Still trying to optimize this movement is tough. Very tough. Even here, I think maybe you don't want to run with Pampas there. You want to jump a bit earlier just to avoid the resistance of the slide. So coming up is the one fail where I had to load in the run. This boss really isn't that hard. It's just the start of it that's very demanding. You can do 7 attacks, but you basically have to do it perfectly, so I just opt for 6. And all that happened there is I just forgot to turn. You have to throw your fireball and then immediately turn to the right. And I just forgot to turn. Thankfully, that wasn't a huge loss. It was a pretty quick reset, but it's not something you want to see, of course. I also think it might be better to go to the right wall. After you have to turn away. It seems like it could affect your ability to hit Gorgon after getting hit by the snake, but that is conjecture. I don't actually have any evidence of that per se. So we take out a couple of skeletons here, of course by burning ourselves, which is so wise. That is sarcasm. But these bones are going to allow us to do a skip in Kraken, and then a skip in Pyros. However, as you'll see later on, I failed the skip in Pyros and did things very sweatily. On that previous screen with the 2 blocks, if you move perfectly, you will not get hit, but I did not move perfectly. That is one of those screens that demonstrates how important it is to move immediately on some screens in this game because of cycles. If there was a bit more of a delay between screens, some of that stuff would not be so brutal. So here I failed. You want to get higher up so you can throw the bone there, not have to do that whole movement. I opt to go back and heal. So I'm getting too low for comfort. There's no need yet to be playing things extremely tight. I mean, I'm minutes ahead at this point due to routing optimizations. So might as well just be safe. That is also my suggestion for anyone who's trying to run this game. If you're low on health, it's not worth it. Just go back and heal. You should have the money. And if you don't, you need to figure out why you don't have enough money. Put out the fire the old-fashioned way by jumping into water. So I actually go for this skip here, which is just weird. I still don't understand the mechanics of this skip. As you would think, I think it might be you have to take out one of the big bats and a particular bat and their tiny friend, because it seems like sometimes it just doesn't work, which to me implies that you have to take out one and not the other. It's really weird. So that wasted a nice chunk of change. They're a pretty big mistake. The three really big mistakes happened near the end of this run. And by big, I mean like probably at a total to about a minute or so. Which in the context of a run that's nearly an hour, that is substantial. This boss is really simple as long as you know how to pace out your shots and position yourself. No big deal. Now we are heading over to Pyros. The most efficient thing to do is to go to Hecate. Hecate? I have no idea. Fun fact, that intro screen to the sewers is now different on the most recent patch. I think it's a slightly faster to modify the frog behavior. So this money was not necessary. I would have been able to beat the game with 90 gold. 90 gold would be just fine to be able to heal Pampas and Selene, I'm pretty sure. I mean, we'll see. Keep in mind, of course, you will get incidental money, but we'll see if 90 gold would have been good enough right at the end of the game. 9-0. Because that would save a few seconds, not doing that pickup. This is a tough dungeon. It's very demanding, high APM movement, and you have these electric spark ball cycles to contend with. Selene just takes a lot of damage unless you are an uber nerd and you're really good which I am not an uber nerd yet at the movement in this dungeon. I feel like the skill ceiling is really high in this dungeon in particular. And I'm sure there's some fun little optimizations you can do to make it better. Came out of the water perfectly there. This is not the fastest way to go to the bottom, but it's just the easy way to go to the bottom to get this gravestone. The other way, you blink to the left and avoid taking the brain hit, which is nice because, again, health is a bit of an issue in this dungeon, as you want to move with Selene, but she really takes it on the chin in this dungeon. So does Pampas, because we never got the armor upgrade from Ares. This is a reason why 100% ought to be easier than any percent in the end. So here's the error. I accidentally threw my bones out too fast because the brain stopped doing its control reversal. So now I had to do this the old-fashioned way, which I am not used to. But, you know, cooler heads prevail. We got through it and we didn't get hit by the thing that teleports us backwards. But that's a screen where you really need to be on point with your movement from the get-go, and I was not. I think the thing to do is drop and wait for the brain to start reversing your controls. Like, just drop and wait. And then you should be fine. So we go back and get the worms. I am pretty certain that getting worms here is worth it because it saves us so many cycles. And you can hit Pyros while it's flying this high, but it's quite hard to do. It's very precise. And in one fell swoop, we remove 53% of the health bar. It saves several cycles, so... And I think a cycle probably takes, like, what? 15 seconds? We'll see here. Yeah, it's like 11 seconds, so if you save 3 cycles, if you do save like 3 cycles, it's 33 seconds, and going back to farm worms takes around 10 seconds, so it works out in your favor. Just be aware that you can get hit by Pyros on the way up. But this, where Pyros goes is completely deterministic. So as long as you know the fight, it's really not that big of a deal. Of course, I ended up standing in the wrong spot at first, but you still got the cycle A-okay. Big thank you, by the way, to Fran, the developer of this game, who has continued to make adjustments to the speedrun mode to make it fast, and some of the changes that have occurred for casual players have not carried over to speedrun mode, which is really nice. So this was a mistake. On this screen, I think the best thing to do is just burn the broom. Because you don't want to... I went back to heal, even though this does waste me a little bit of time, as I want to be at full health going into this boss. It's not necessary, but can you blame me? This boss is really scary with limited equipment. So the time ability is really helpful for this, as we can do more damage on one of the phases and try to prevent ourselves from taking unnecessary damage. So planting that mine was a mistake. There was no reason to do that, and I just took half of Selene's life out based off of one mistake. So, and you want to be using Selene for this boss because her damage output's a bit better than Pampas's and any percent. And 100%, you actually want to use Pampas. His DPS is higher, but of course I screwed up here, so this fight just became extremely scary off of some really silly mistakes. Once the speed increases, this is the attack we want to use the time slow on. The skeleton, the skulls are really annoying to dodge, and they hurt like hell. So this was a very sweaty boss fight, much sweatier than I want it to be. Unnecessarily scary. Don't try this at home. If you are going to try it at home, do it better than this. But this is the other reason why, like, I think 100% may be a better entry point into this game, oddly enough. Because while you do have more errands to run, this boss is nowhere near as terrifying if you make mistakes. I mean, there are things you can do to make this boss less scary on any percent, but they require diversions and errands that we would rather not do. But thankfully, we got through without incident. Pampas was at full HP, completely riding the back of his sister there. And there we go. 101.55 global time and 101.31 in-game time. So that accounts for our pause and load at Gorgon. A really great improvement on the previous run, and still shows room for improvement on various factors. I'm sure there's still some routing improvements beyond what I mentioned in this commentary track. I look forward to whoever else decides to run this category. It is a very thrilling category. The first 20 minutes are a bit slow, but I think that's speaking in relative to how fast the rest of the game goes. Once you get to the Arachne dungeon, it truly feels like you just have your foot on the floor of the car that is Pampas and Selene, the Maze of Demons. So we're letting the credits roll out, and I do want to once again give some thanks to Fran for the fixes to this most recent patch for the speedrun mode, among other changes. It's not just changes for the speedrun mode. And thanks to Jack Lefear, one of the helpers on this game. Been a real blast helping work and test on this game. I love I think that's a pig. I gotta love these credits because it almost implies that there's gonna be like 2 more Pampas and Selene games. By the way, it actually is Pampas, not Pampas, but I am a stubborn person who wants to call Pampas Pampas, because then I can say Pam, not Pom. Pom. No, that's Pam. Here's my friend Pam. So next up on the agenda is a 100% route and run. The route roughly exists and I will be hopefully within the next few weeks posting a 100% run. We will see how much slower that is, but I don't think it's horribly slower compared to any percent. And I think the run is pretty cool for the additional little things you have to do. Not really that bad in terms of difficulty, just some more errands for us to run, and on occasion doing something a little bit different compared to the any percent route earlier on. It roughly follows the any percent route with some little additions here and there until the end of the game, where we do a bunch of stuff that we have to complete. So please look forward to that if you have already enjoyed this run you've seen here. We now have our completion total and our time tracker. Thank you all so much for watching this speedrun. I hope you have a wonderful day.